When 3 black SUVs rolled into our cul-de-sac at dawn and uniformed men stepped out wearing earpieces, Karen from across the street actually brought out lawn chairs and a thermos to watch the takedown. She waved at them excitedly like she'd just summoned the Avengers. What she didn't know, what no one in our HOA nightmare neighborhood knew, was that the woman she had reported as a potential domestic threat, the one she'd accused of foreign contacts and military-grade equipment, was the very reason those agents were there. And when they walked past her, straight up to my wife, saluted her, and asked for orders, Karen dropped her coffee all over her patriotic flag sock. Her face twisted into something between horror and disbelief. She had just called Homeland Security on Homeland Security, and the fallout was going to be legendary. It all started about 6 weeks earlier, when Liana and I moved into Oak Ridge, a neighborhood with perfect lawns, constant bake sales, and an HOA that had more rules than a federal court. We weren't looking for trouble. In fact, Liana had specifically chosen this place for its silence and structure after working 3 high-stakes international assignments. She needed calm. We got a storm named Karen instead. Karen was the self-appointed sheriff of Oak Ridge, unofficially elected, proudly intrusive, and absurdly convinced that she alone kept the neighborhood safe from the looming threats of uncut grass, noisy wind chimes, and people who didn't look like they fit in. Liana, with her combat boots, tinted SUV, and cold stare, didn't fit in. That alone made us suspects. The first week was relatively peaceful. We unpacked quietly, kept to ourselves, and spent most evenings barbecuing in the backyard while Liana occasionally made encrypted calls or typed reports on her secure laptop. Her work was classified, but not in the fake, mysterious way. She really couldn't talk about it, not even with me. All I knew was she worked for a branch of Homeland Security, something related to field coordination and intelligence operations. What I didn't know was that our neighbor Karen had binoculars and an internet addiction. The first complaint came on a Tuesday. A note in our mailbox, unsigned but clearly typed on HOA letterhead, said, "Satellite dishes not allowed in backyard. Kindly remove." We didn't have a satellite dish. We had an encrypted uplink disguised to look like one. Liana didn't respond. She simply adjusted it so it pointed higher, which, if anything, made Karen more curious. The next day, we caught her snapping photos from her upstairs window. Not subtle. Liana just waved. Things escalated quickly. Karen formed a Facebook group titled Oak Ridge Safety Coalition, where she began posting grainy images of our backyard and warning others to stay alert. She claimed we were unregistered tenants with suspicious routines, and she even made a post theorizing that Liana was a foreign operative married to a planted American. Someone in the comments asked if she was okay. Another posted a SpongeBob meme. But a few others joined in, saying they had concerns too. The Whisper Network had officially begun. Liana didn't seem fazed. If anything, she found it amusing. "You know," she said one evening, casually cleaning her service weapon, "I've been investigated by 2 foreign governments, nearly kidnapped in Morocco, and had my hotel room bugged by an arms dealer, but I've never been targeted by a woman in yoga pants holding a dog named Freedom." I laughed, but I knew she was watching everything. Karen wasn't just watching. She was digging. She somehow got a hold of an old license plate number from Liana's vehicle, ran it through a shady online service, and got a hit, except it wasn't Liana's plate. It belonged to a former DHS field agent who had been on national news a few years back. From there, Karen's brain stitched together a whole new fantasy. She posted in the Facebook group again, saying she had confirmed links to government ops, and that someone should alert the authorities before it's too late. I thought she was bluffing. She wasn't. 2 days later, Homeland Security's Internal Investigation Department received an anonymous tip through a public hotline. The complaint was detailed, bizarre, and full of red flags. It mentioned encrypted tech, military-grade gear, nighttime movements, and possible foreign language communications. The report had all the hallmarks of a crank call, until it reached Liana's own terminal. Her clearance level was high enough to get notified about any security threats filed under her alias. When she opened the alert, she went still. Then she showed me the complaint. It was about her. In her own system. Filed by a neighbor, claiming she was a national security risk. Her jaw clenched. They actually filed a flag on me, she whispered, almost in disbelief. They don't even realize they just activated an internal probe on an agent. The DHS had protocols for internal reports filed externally. The moment someone from the public accused a field agent of misconduct or subversion, a special review protocol launched. And even though the claims were absurd, the agency had no choice but to follow through. An inspection team would be dispatched to verify the agent's clearance, evaluate the living conditions, and interview the reported individual. Karen had just sent DHS agents to investigate DHS. Karen, of course, was oblivious. She assumed she had done something heroic. She walked around the neighborhood wearing an American flag poncho and told everyone she might have stopped a terrorist cell. The only cell she stopped was her own Wi-Fi when she unplugged her router thinking it was a bug device. Meanwhile, Liana was handling the investigation with surgical precision. She filed her counter-report, prepared her clearance documents, and even reached out to the DHS inspection chief personally to ensure the process was smooth. Then came the morning. 3 black SUVs, government plates, and silent boots on pavement. The neighborhood froze. People came out in bathrobes. Karen pulled out her phone and began live streaming. They're here. Homeland Security is here to investigate the threat at 3027, she whispered into her mic like a true crime podcaster. I told them. I warned everyone. The agents ignored her entirely. They walked straight past her, up our driveway, and Liana opened the door already holding her identification and internal protocol file. The lead agent saluted. Ma'am, he said. We're here per directive. Shall we proceed? Liana stepped aside and nodded. Let's get it over with. Karen's face crumpled. Her stream ended abruptly. She turned to the watching crowd and muttered something about deep cover, but no one was listening. They were too busy watching the supposed suspect welcome federal agents into her home like it was a reunion. The investigation hadn't even started, and the truth was already leaking out. What Karen had triggered wasn't an arrest. It was an audit, and it was about to expose not just her ignorance, but the entire web of paranoia she had built over the last few weeks. Because by the time this was over, Karen wouldn't just lose her self-made badge of neighborhood honor, she might lose a lot more. And Liana? She was just getting started. Inside the house, Liana moved with complete calm as the DHS agents entered and began their inspection. There was no tension, no raised voices, no confusion, because unlike most visits of this nature, this one was orchestrated by the very agent being investigated. That irony wasn't lost on anyone in the room, least of all the inspection lead, a tall, square-jawed man named Delgado who had worked with Liana on 2 past missions and treated her with the kind of respect you usually only see exchanged between generals. He didn't shake her hand, he saluted. Not once did they mention the word suspect. Instead, they reviewed her credentials, conducted a few obligatory walkthroughs, and laughed at the ridiculousness of being called in to investigate one of their own based on the ramblings of a neighbor who clearly thought she was starring in her own low-budget spy thriller. Meanwhile, outside, Karen was spiraling. Her live stream had gone offline, but that didn't stop her from pacing the street, phone still in hand, whispering into the camera like she was reporting for CNN. She kept refreshing the HOA Facebook group, hoping to see more people rallying to her cause, but all she saw were confused comments and a couple of laughing emojis. Her narrative was starting to slip, and the more the agents stayed inside, the more paranoid she became. She even ran over to one of the SUVs and started peering into the windows, trying to catch a glimpse of any confiscated evidence. When a second agent outside politely asked her to step away from the vehicle, she recoiled as if she'd been assaulted, loudly declaring her rights and threatening to file a formal complaint with Washington. Inside, Liana's review was nearing completion. She answered every question with clipped professionalism and handed over documentation that not only verified her position but also demonstrated that she had never broken a single regulation in her time at Oak Ridge. The uplink in the backyard? Classified but registered. The satellite phone? Agency issued. The tactical gear in our garage? Federally certified for field emergencies. Delgado reviewed each item with precision, nodded, and signed off one by one. After an hour, he turned to her with a tired grin and said, "This is the cleanest clearance review I've done in 10 years. Then he lowered his voice. "Off the record, this is some next-level nonsense. You must have pissed someone off real bad." Liana chuckled without humor. "Her name's Karen. She thinks I'm with the Russian consulate." Delgado raised an eyebrow, then turned to me. "And you?" "I'm just the husband," I said. "Mostly here for moral support and barbecue." When the agents finally left, they did so respectfully and without fanfare. No boxes carried out, no cuffs, no drama. They got in their vehicles, gave Liana a final nod, and drove off as quietly as they came. Karen, who had been waiting on her porch with a notepad, raced across the street in a full sprint to intercept them before they left. She got within 10 feet before the agent in the passenger seat rolled down the window just long enough to say, "Ma'am, step away from the vehicle." Then the SUV sped off. Karen was left standing in the middle of the road like a child who'd missed the ice cream truck. The moment they disappeared from sight, Karen stormed into action. She made another post in the Facebook group, this time claiming the agents had clearly been intimidated and forced to back down due to a cover-up. She insisted she'd gotten too close to the truth. Her followers had dwindled to 3 people, 2 of which were her cat's Instagram account. But that didn't matter to her. She had tasted attention and now she wanted more. She started sending out emails to local news outlets, trying to spin the story into an exposé. When that didn't work, she emailed the mayor. Then the governor. She even tried to get on a late-night conspiracy podcast, but they rejected her for being too far out. What Karen didn't realize was that her call had tripped a very different wire. In Homeland Security, any false report involving national security triggers a secondary protocol, especially if the target is an active agent. And even though the investigation had cleared Liana, it didn't mean the situation was over. In fact, it was just beginning. Liana now had the green light to open a formal inquiry into the origin of the false complaint, and with it came authority to access the communication trail that led back to Karen's report. Every photo, every comment, every file she had shared online was now being gathered and catalogued. A few days later, an unmarked envelope showed up at our door. Inside was a full transcript of Karen's tip, along with a note from Delgado. "Figured you'd want to see what amateur hour looks like." The report was a mess. Typos, wild accusations, references to unseen Middle Eastern visitors, and coded radio messages, and a complete misunderstanding of how federal communication channels even worked. Liana read it once, set it down, and said, "This woman thinks walkie-talkies are encrypted signals." But it wasn't just stupidity. It was malice. Karen had doctored screenshots, manipulated timestamps, and used language that echoed the kind of xenophobic dog whistles often associated with extremist communities. That alone made it more than just a harmless nuisance. It was a security concern, one that DHS had no choice but to investigate. Liana submitted her findings, and the agency launched a preliminary review into Karen's online activity. It didn't take long to find something even worse. Multiple past attempts to report her neighbors for suspicious behavior, including a family of Indian descent and a gay couple who had lived 3 houses down. She had a pattern, and that pattern had now reached federal eyes. The next week, a local sheriff's deputy showed up at Karen's house with a legal envelope and a stern warning. She wasn't being arrested, not yet, but she was being placed under scrutiny. The restraining order was clear. No more surveillance, no more false reports, and no contact with our property or any of our guests. Karen stood at her door, trembling with indignation, holding the paper like it had personally insulted her. She tried to say something to the deputy, but he held up a hand and said, "Ma'am, this is your final warning. You're lucky they're being this polite." Then he turned and walked away. Karen went radio silent for a full day. No post. No neighborhood patrols. No flag-themed capes. But the peace didn't last. The next night, she stood on her porch under the glow of a solar-powered lantern and addressed the block like she was giving a press conference. "I just want to say," she declared, "that I will not be silenced. This is still America, and I have the right to protect my community. I've lived here for 12 years, and no amount of federal intimidation is going to change that." Nobody clapped. One man coughed. Someone else closed their blinds. Liana was sitting in our living room, sipping tea, watching it unfold on the Ring camera feed with the kind of relaxed smile I'd only ever seen after one of her successful missions. She didn't say a word. She didn't need to. The look on her face said it all. Karen had declared war against someone who lived and breathed national security, and had absolutely no idea how badly she was outmatched. The following week passed with the eerie stillness of a waiting storm. Karen had gone quiet, but not in a way that felt like surrender. It was the kind of silence that hinted at gears grinding behind the scenes, a false calm that promised a second act. Liana knew it too. She could feel the rhythm of it like a veteran sensing enemy movement in unfamiliar terrain. For Karen, the public slap on the wrist had only intensified her obsession. She had tasted proximity to perceived power and humiliation in the same breath, and now she was desperate to regain control over the narrative that had slipped through her fingers like sand. From our vantage point, the neighborhood seemed to breathe again. People began speaking to us cautiously, offering awkward smiles or casual waves, like they had finally accepted that we weren't spies or cartel members or whatever nonsense Karen had been spinning. Some even came up with half-hearted apologies. One woman mumbled that she never believed all that stuff anyway, even though we'd seen her liking every single paranoid post Karen had uploaded. Liana didn't react. She didn't need validation. She wasn't here to win hearts. She was here to neutralize threats, and in her mind, Karen was now officially a recurring variable of instability. But then, on a Friday morning, things took a darker turn. Liana received an alert on her work system. Someone had tried to remotely access a secured Homeland Security portal from a residential IP address registered in our neighborhood. That in itself was troubling. The system automatically flagged it as a failed breach attempt, and while it was too unsophisticated to be anything more than a layman's curiosity, the fact that it came from a house just 3 doors down raised serious red flags. Liana followed protocol and requested a trace. Within 10 minutes, she had the source, Karen's IP address. She didn't just file a false report. Now she was attempting to access restricted government infrastructure. That crossed a threshold. What had started as delusional neighborhood drama had now turned into a case of cyber intrusion, albeit by someone completely out of their depth. Karen wasn't just poking the bear. She was climbing into its cave and lighting fireworks. Liana immediately documented the breach and filed a Level 2 concern with the DHS Cyber Division. That meant Karen's online activity was now subject to legal monitoring, and within hours, a digital forensics analyst was reviewing her history. The results were both disturbing and absurd. Her browser was filled with conspiracy forums, militia recruitment sites, anti-government manifestos, and hours of surveillance footage from around the neighborhood, including nighttime videos of our house that she had edited with dramatic sound effects. She even had a document labeled Operation Neighborhood Cleanse, filled with bullet points that read more like rejected spy movie plotlines than anything grounded in reality. But the most damning evidence was her file labeled Exposé, which was a bizarre collection of photoshopped images, fake emails, and misquoted regulations that she intended to send to local news outlets. She had been preparing to go public with a full media campaign. Liana printed out the entire dossier and sent it to DHS Legal for review. The agency had to determine if Karen's behavior constituted a domestic security concern or if she was simply a deluded individual who needed psychiatric help. Either way, they were no longer viewing her as a harmless neighbor. She was now officially tagged as a hostile civilian actor under evaluation. While that process moved forward behind the scenes, Liana took a different approach publicly. She began to assert her presence within the community, not loudly, not with bravado, but with deliberate poise. She attended the next HOA meeting, something we had both avoided until now. Karen was noticeably absent, likely under advice from the same fringe lawyer she had mentioned on her Facebook. The room buzzed as Liana entered, everyone aware of the recent events but unsure how to address them. The HOA president, a balding man with a constant nervous sweat, tried to act like everything was normal, but his voice cracked every time he looked in her direction. When the floor opened for discussion, Liana stood. She didn't raise her voice or point fingers. She simply read from a prepared statement detailing the events of the past month. She outlined the false accusations, the federal review, the attempted data breach, and the legal consequences that were now unfolding. She ended by calmly stating, "I ask only one thing. That this community starts treating rumor and fear with the same suspicion it wrongly gave to facts and service." Then she sat down. The silence that followed was total. You could have heard a mosquito blink. After the meeting, several residents approached her privately, some to apologize, some to thank her, and one even asked if she'd consider running for the HOA board. Liana politely declined. "I prefer working with real intelligence agencies," she said with a straight face, and the man blinked, unsure if she was joking. But there was a shift in the air. The spell Karen had cast over the neighborhood was breaking. People weren't buying into her hysteria anymore, and Liana's quiet authority had redefined who they were dealing with. But Karen wasn't done. A few days later, she made one final, desperate move. She sent a mass email to the entire neighborhood with an attachment she labeled "The Truth." It was a 34-page PDF filled with unhinged rants, screenshots of emails she had fabricated, and still images from our backyard with red circles drawn around normal objects like our garden hose and barbecue grill. She insisted these were covert communication tools, and that our garden gnome was listening in. She even included a pie chart she titled "Likelihood of Government Subversion," where our house occupied a whopping 92%. The email did not have the impact she had hoped. Within hours, the HOA board released a formal statement disavowing Karen and suspending her from all committee duties. The sheriff's office updated her restraining order to include digital harassment. And Liana, with the full backing of DHS, authorized the release of a community memo, not revealing classified details but clearly stating that Karen's claims had no basis in reality and that her behavior was now under federal legal review. It was the most polite takedown I had ever seen. It didn't need to shout. It simply made it clear. Karen had lost. Later that night, as we sat on our back porch, Liana quietly reviewed her note. The garden was calm, the breeze soft, and for the first time in weeks, the street didn't feel like a war zone. She looked over at me and said, "It's funny." She kept saying she wanted to protect the neighborhood. In the end, the biggest threat to it was her. I nodded. "And now," she said, closing her laptop, "we wait for the fallout. She doesn't know it yet, but she's already crossed every line that matters. The system moves slow sometimes, but it never forgets." She leaned back, her eyes fixed on the stars. I gave her every chance to stop. Across the street, Karen's house remained dark. No flags, no movement, no signs of the defiant vigilante she once pretended to be. But Liana wasn't fooled. She knew silence was only temporary, and she was ready for whatever came next. Because in the world Karen had tried to step into, there were no second chances for recklessness. There were only consequences, and they were coming. It was almost impressive how fast Karen went from neighborhood nuisance to legal case study. Her attempt to paint herself as a whistleblower had completely imploded, and with DHS now involved on multiple fronts, the storm she summoned had grown into something far larger than she could handle. But that didn't stop her from trying. Her fantasy of being the patriotic underdog, the last line of defense between suburbia and the shadow government, had metastasized. She doubled down, as people like her always do. No apology, no accountability, just new delusions layered over the ashes of the old ones. And now, those delusions had taken her to court. The preliminary hearing was held in a small county courtroom 2 towns over. Liana and I didn't attend, we weren't required to, but the DHS legal team was there in full force, armed with documents, screenshots, and enough digital evidence to fill a small library. Karen arrived alone, wearing a red, white, and blue blazer, and carrying a folder stuffed with printed-out Facebook posts, most of which had been deleted after violating the platform's disinformation policies. Her defense was predictably bizarre. She claimed she had the right to investigate threats as a citizen defender, a term she invented on the spot. Her printed evidence included maps of our backyard, printouts of our Amazon package deliveries, and stills from our security camera that she insisted proved we were running surveillance on her. When the judge asked if she had any formal training in law enforcement, intelligence, or even security, Karen proudly said she took a self-defense workshop in 1998. The DHS attorneys stayed calm. They presented the chain of events with brutal efficiency. The false report filed through official federal channels, the unauthorized surveillance, the attempted breach of a classified portal, the pattern of online harassment, and the fabricated materials she tried to distribute to local media. It was a damning narrative, even more so because every claim Karen had made about Liana turned out not only to be false, but absurdly so. The court reviewed her evidence and couldn't find a single element rooted in reality. But the real moment that shifted the room came when they played a video Karen had uploaded but quickly deleted. In the clip, she walked around the neighborhood with a selfie stick, pointing at houses and whispering about who might be compromised, before turning the camera on herself and saying, "Even if they arrest me, I'll know I did what was right. Patriots don't follow orders, they follow instincts." The judge stopped the playback halfway through and called for a recess. When court resumed, the tone had changed completely. Karen's behavior was now being treated not as eccentricity, but as targeted harassment and abuse of federal infrastructure. Her lawyer, a local generalist who looked like he regretted every moment of the last hour, whispered frantically to her, likely urging her to settle, to apologize, to do anything to stop the bleeding. But Karen refused. She doubled down again, filing a motion to have Liana's credentials reviewed, claiming she was faking her government position. That motion was immediately denied, and the judge threatened her with contempt if she submitted another frivolous claim. Back at home, we tracked the proceedings through DHS updates. Liana was professional as always, but I could see the way her jaw clenched each time she read through the case summaries. Karen's actions were more than personal now. They represented a danger that extended beyond us. False reports like hers didn't just waste resources. They undermined the entire structure of public safety. Every second spent investigating a made-up threat was a second not spent preventing a real one. Liana had dealt with this kind of recklessness overseas. She never thought she'd face it in her own neighborhood, from someone waving an American flag and yelling about freedom while stomping all over the systems built to protect it. Then came the media attention. Somehow, word leaked. A small local paper ran a piece with the headline, "HOA Drama Escalates to Federal Court." It was meant to be lighthearted, but the article picked up traction online, and soon the story snowballed. A major news blog did a feature, then a satirical news site turned Karen into a meme. A screen grab of her courtroom rant, face red and eyes wild, was paired with captions like "Patriot Level," "Unhinged," and "She tried to red, white, and ruin herself." Someone made a parody Twitter account under the handle @CitizenDefenderKaren. Within 3 days, it had 50,000 followers. Karen, predictably, claimed this was part of a smear campaign. She blamed the deep state, the liberal media, even our mailbox design. She went online and posted a video ranting about how she was silenced by tyranny, all while literally holding a microphone and uploading the clip to 3 different platforms. Her comment sections became a battleground between supporters from fringe conspiracy forums and people with actual critical thinking skills. One commenter wrote, "You're not a freedom fighter. You're just HOA Hitler with a Wi-Fi password." Another asked if she was planning to report the squirrels next for suspicious tail movements. All of this was amusing in its own way, but Liana knew it couldn't go unchecked forever. DHS was deliberating its next steps, and while a full-blown federal charge was possible, they also weighed whether Karen's actions stemmed more from ignorance than malice. That's when something unexpected happened. A neighbor who had remained quiet during all of this, an older woman named Ms. Roth, sent a message to Liana. She'd lived next to Karen for over a decade and had quietly documented her behavior for years. She had screenshots, complaint letters, even audio recordings of Karen bragging about getting people kicked out of the neighborhood through anonymous tip. Liana met with her, thanked her for the evidence, and forwarded it to her legal team. The result was a complete shift in the legal strategy. DHS wasn't just pursuing Karen for her actions against us anymore. They now had a pattern of abuse that included multiple families, stretching back years. With this new information, the agency upgraded the case from a personal defense matter to a broader investigation into civilian misuse of federal channels. Karen was no longer a nosy neighbor. She was a repeat offender of anti-harassment and anti-defamation laws, with a trail of digital and physical harassment strong enough to justify civil and criminal consequences. The final nail came not in a courtroom, but in the HOA meeting held 1 week later. Karen, in an act of defiance, tried to reclaim her position as self-appointed HOA vice chair, a position she had technically invented. When she stood up to speak, several residents immediately objected. One even read a statement prepared by the new HOA president. Karen was officially barred from holding any neighborhood administrative role or attending private community meetings pending legal proceedings. She shouted that this was unconstitutional, but no one was listening anymore. A man near the back muttered, "She called Homeland Security on Homeland Security." What did she expect? After the meeting, the board released an updated code of conduct. It included specific language banning unauthorized. By the time the final summons landed on Karen's doorstep, there wasn't a single person in the neighborhood who didn't know what was going on. The story had stretched far beyond our cul-de-sac, even beyond our city. National outlets had picked it up, spinning Karen's antics into a cautionary tale about weaponized paranoia and the dangers of mistaking delusion for duty. But what they didn't know, what hadn't yet been released publicly, was that Karen had committed one last act of desperation, one final maneuver that pushed her off the ledge completely. And this time, even her imaginary badge of patriotism wouldn't save her. It happened 2 days after the HOA meeting that officially removed her from all neighborhood roles. She must have realized her influence was slipping away for good, because instead of retreating quietly, she tried to go out in a blaze of self-righteous glory. Late that night, she walked down the street wearing all black and a hood, creeping through yards like a wannabe spy. She bypassed our front lawn, avoiding the visible cameras, and headed for the side entrance near the garage, where she assumed there might be a blind spot. What she didn't know was that Liana had installed a wide-angle motion-triggered thermal cam 2 weeks earlier. It caught her movements in perfect clarity, including the moment she held up her phone and tried to access the encrypted network box we had installed on the side wall. She wasn't just taking photos anymore. She was attempting to interfere with federal communications hardware. That one move turned her into a criminal suspect under federal surveillance tampering statute. By the time the sun rose, Liana had already filed a classified breach report and turned over the footage. The Department of Homeland Security took less than 12 hours to respond. Karen's actions now fell under criminal interference with protected systems, and the penalty was severe. That morning, 2 unmarked vehicles arrived, this time with federal agents and a technician who collected Karen's electronic devices under a signed warrant. She screamed at them from her porch, calling them cowards, traitors, and invaders. One agent remained completely calm and said, "Ma'am, you are not under arrest, yet. But this is your last opportunity to cooperate voluntarily." Karen threw a plastic lawn gnome at him and yelled something about the Constitution. The agent simply caught the gnome midair and handed it to a second officer without breaking eye contact. They didn't even flinch. Her electronics were taken, her devices searched, and her internet activity exposed. The agents found message board rants about overthrowing the HOA, several half-written manifestos blaming everything from 5G towers to foreign pizza chains, and most notably, a folder titled Exit Plan that included a fake press release she drafted to email to news outlets once she was arrested by the deep state. She had planned to claim political persecution, frame herself as a martyr, and ignite some sort of suburban rebellion. All of this might have been laughable if it weren't for the danger it represented. Liana wasn't laughing. She was reading through the tech team's report with narrowed eyes and a stillness that made me nervous. She wasn't angry. She was calculating. And that was always worse. The following week brought the final cascade of consequences. A court date was scheduled, and Karen was formally charged with false reporting, cyber trespass, obstruction of federal operations, and unlawful surveillance. Liana was subpoenaed as a witness, and DHS sent a team of legal advisors to ensure everything moved by the book. Karen, true to form, tried to countersue, claiming the government had targeted her unfairly. Her lawsuit was dismissed in less than 4 minutes. She fired her lawyer mid-hearing and chose to represent herself, citing a YouTube video about sovereign citizens and courtroom loopholes. The judge, already beyond patience, made it clear that she was no longer being seen as a confused civilian but as a disruptive element who posed ongoing risk. But the part that hit Karen the hardest wasn't legal. It was personal. One by one, her former allies in the neighborhood stepped away. People who had once nodded along with her ramblings now crossed the street to avoid her. Families she claimed to protect began submitting affidavits describing how she had harassed them over the years. The couple next door revealed that she had once stood outside their window for over an hour with binoculars, insisting she saw them, sending coded light signals. Another neighbor admitted she threatened to report their child's lemonade stand for unlicensed economic activity. She was unmasked completely, not as a neighborhood watchwoman but as a self-appointed tyrant who cloaked her insecurities in a flag and tried to disguise fear as vigilance. On the morning of her final hearing, Karen arrived at the courthouse with American flags pinned to her lapel and a shaky hand-drawn sign that read, "I'm being silenced." Nobody was there to support her. Not one person from the community showed up. Even her sister, who lived in the next town over, had filed a formal request not to be associated with her case. Liana didn't gloat. She walked into that courtroom calmly, took the stand, and told the truth. She described the timeline of events without dramatics or exaggeration. She presented the evidence, explained the impact of false reporting on national security operations, and let the facts speak for themselves. When asked if she felt personally threatened, she paused, then said yes, but not for herself. For the people who might suffer because real emergencies were buried beneath Karen's fantasy-fueled nonsense. That moment landed like a hammer. The judge sentenced Karen to 6 months of monitored house arrest, 2 years of probation, mandatory psychiatric evaluation, and 240 hours of community service. She was also fined heavily for the cost of the resources diverted due to her actions. It wasn't jail, but it was a full-scale legal defeat, and more importantly, it was public. The ruling was published in local papers, broadcast on news segments, and even featured in an online think piece titled When Patriotism Becomes Paranoia. Karen had wanted attention. Now she had it. Just not the kind that came with admiration or applause. As for us, we packed up a month later and moved to a private property outside city limits, away from HOAs, neighborhood watch lists, and self-appointed guardians of peace. Liana transferred to a quiet administrative post for a while, stepping away from field work just long enough to breathe again. The house we bought sat on 5 acres, surrounded by trees and quiet. No security cameras needed. Just peace. On our last day in Oak Ridge, we left behind one thing: a small garden statue at the edge of our front yard. It was shaped like an owl, with a tiny plaque at the bottom that read, "Always watching." It was our little inside joke. We knew Karen would see it. We knew she'd read into it. That was the point. A week after our move, we got a letter in the mail. No return address, no signature. Just a single sentence typed in bold, shaky font. I never meant to hurt anyone. It was folded around a printed image of our house, circled in red. We didn't respond. Liana filed it, just in case. But we didn't lose sleep over it either. Because people like Karen never truly disappear. They just lose their audience. And when the spotlight fades, they either fade with it or implode trying to get it back.